This piece of shit therapist just sat down, typing on her computer, not saying a goddamn word to me, and at the end of the session, she'd be like, okay, let's meditate for a little bit. It's like, bitch, I didn't even get to talk about my problems, and you're telling me to sit here and meditate? I'm here to talk to you about my problems, not here to sit down on a goddamn couch and listen to calming music, because that's not gonna solve any of my problems. It might help me in specific situations, but when I want to talk to someone about my problems that I'm paying to talk to about my problems, then I want to talk about my goddamn problems. So in my lifetime, I've had a fair number of experience with a fair number of different therapists. Therapists that not only work on islands in Hawaii or anywhere really in the Hawaiian Islands, but with therapists who necessarily work on the mainland, who aren't here in person but are able to do a online group therapy kind of thing. So it's safe to say that I've had a fair share amount of experience when it comes to therapists. And the therapist I'm going to be talking about today is one of the worst ones, and the one that really pissed me off the most. So let me give you a little bit of backstory. I have a psychotic condition, and I suffered from an eating disorder, an addiction to an eating disorder. And I don't tell a lot of people in my personal life about that. And I sort of expected if I tell my therapist, they're not gonna, freak out because they've dealt with people like me before. This therapist freaked out. So, because I have a psychotic condition, I've had things known as positive symptoms and negative symptoms. Positive symptoms are symptoms that are added to your life. For example, external stimuli that isn't there, or beliefs that are not based in reality. In simple terms, hallucinations and delusions. When it comes to negative symptoms of psychosis, that includes depression, lack of motivation, and stuff like that. Also, in positive symptoms, there are symptoms of anxiety and paranoia, and anxiety and paranoia. So, just to give a little basis of that, psychosis both pertains to adding things to your life and taking away things from your life. And I also suffered from an eating disorder, bulimia to be more specific, because when I was coming off of one of my antipsychotics, it threw my life into such a horrible mess that I needed some way to cope. And at the time, I had already overcome alcoholism, so I tried seeking other ways to cope. Other unhealthier ways to cope, I admit, but other ways to cope nonetheless. And I sort of told all this to this therapist that I was hoping that she would be able to give me some advice, be able to work me through the problems, as they say in the world of psychiatric care, to process the information. And this therapist just didn't. This piece of shit therapist just sat down, typing on her computer, not saying a goddamn word to me, and at the end of the session, she'd be like, okay, let's meditate for a little bit. It's like, bitch, I didn't even get to talk about my problems, and you're telling me to sit here and meditate? I'm here to talk to you about my problems, not here to sit down on a goddamn couch and listen to calming music, because that's not gonna solve any of my problems. It might help me in specific situations, but when I want to talk to someone about my problems that I'm paying to talk to about my problems, then I want to talk about my goddamn problems. And she just sat there on her computer, and I remember I was telling her, oh, my life kind of went out of control around the time I had spine surgery, and I turned to unhealthy coping skills, and I fell into bulimia. And she stops typing and she looks up, she's like, nobody just falls into bulimia. You don't just become bulimic. There has to be something that happens. And I'm thinking, I was like, okay, I just said I was going through withdrawal symptoms and my life was going out of control, and I also was recovering from a spine surgery. So what the fuck do you mean? I don't even know where I was going with that. I think you understand, though. I think you understand where I'm coming from. And that was one of the main things that really pissed me off about this professor. I don't know why I said professor. One of the main things that pissed me off about this therapist was the fact that from the very moment I met her, she would always talk about how, oh, I admire it when patients are able to acknowledge that they need to be hospitalized. And I'm thinking, I was like, this seems like very, very important foreshadowing, which I was correct. So, around that time, I was seeing that therapist. I wasn't able to talk about my problems and process them, so I was in a lot of mental distress, and because I was in so much mental distress, I ended up having to go through psychosis again. And psychosis comes in episodes, right? an episode can last for a very long time, but just because you experience symptoms one day and the next day you don't and the next day you do, that doesn't necessarily mean that the episode had ended, stopped, and started again. It's more of, it comes in waves. At least in my experience, it comes in waves. So I was trying to explain that to this therapist, and she was like, okay, you've been going through 3 psychotic breaks in the past week. We need to hospitalize you. And I'm sitting there thinking, I was like, I've experienced some hallucinations on some days, but that doesn't mean I had an episode, ended the episode, and started another episode. Because in my experience, that's not how it works. When I talked to my psychiatrist, that's not how it works. When I was hospitalized for the first time, I was told that's not how it works. When I was given literal pamphlets about schizophrenia, it said that that's not how it works. I read about different types of medication that target schizophrenia, and a lot of the time it doesn't necessarily take away your symptoms, but it helps you manage them, and you will experience symptoms maybe, like for me at least, 3 times out of the entire week I'll experience symptoms. Based upon all of that, I felt like I had enough information to learn or to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, just because I've experienced symptoms on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, for example, that doesn't mean I've had a psychotic break, stopped the psychotic break, and started another psychotic break. And that's something that my psychiatrist also told me. She said that's not how psychosis works. Psychosis, for many people, comes in waves. But my therapist disagreed. And she said, okay, we're going to send you to the hospital. And I remember she brought in my psychiatrist, and my psychiatrist was like, I don't necessarily agree with you, but he does need to go on a dramatic med change, and it's important for him to be monitored for that. So I'm not saying that he should be admitted because of his psychosis. He should be admitted because he needs to be should be admitted for something else, for the med change. Because at the time I was on a drug called lorazepam, I think it was. And it was a pretty intense drug. It's a benzodiazepine, which means it's in the same class of medication as Xanax. So if you've ever known someone who uses Xanax, or if you've taken Xanax before, you know how addicting that can be. And you do know that if you take it on a regular basis, it can really mess up the neurotransmitters in your brain, which for me, in my specific case, could have caused a seizure. Because I was taking up to 6 milligrams a day. And if I had gone cold turkey, like what my parents wanted me to do, then I probably would have had a seizure. And that would not have been even the worst of my problems, because there's other symptoms of withdrawals that are much more intense. I'm not saying seizures aren't intense, I'm just saying there are a lot of other symptoms that really do make withdrawals suck a lot more. So my therapist at the time, was like, okay, I've been seeing you for about a week, and based on what I know, you need to be hospitalized. And my psychiatrist, who has been with me for years, she's like, I don't really think that you need to be hospitalized for your psychosis. It's more being hospitalized for your med change. But it couldn't hurt. And I'm sitting here thinking, I was like, no, it will hurt. It will freaking hurt. First of all, this goddamn therapist doesn't know jack shit about me, because she just shoves her face in her goddamn computer all the time and makes these printouts for me that are such generalized information. It doesn't even make any fucking sense. And I was sitting there and I was like, no, I'm not going back. I'm not going back into the mental hospital, because I know for a fact that it's gonna do nothing for me. I can taper off of my medication, because I've done that before. I've done that with different meds. I've done that with lorazepam in the past. I've done it. I know what it's like. But my therapist was so focused on sending me to the hospital, because and that's a big reason why I don't really open up to a lot of people. That's a big reason why I wear a mask in these YouTube videos. It's because I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I don't want people to hear me, look at my situation, and maybe if it's one of my psychiatrists or one of my doctors, I don't want them to look at this and be like, oh yeah, he needs to go to the hospital. Because if they're gonna be like, oh, are you Eusebius or Eusebius or Clemente or whatever the fuck, I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I have this intent to not go back. And if you could see under this mask, I'm smiling. Because I really, really, really believe that my second hospitalization, bullshit, didn't need to happen. My third hospitalization, even bigger bullshit, didn't need to happen. But it happened, and I stopped seeing that therapist. I stopped seeing her, and I didn't talk to her ever again, and I never plan to ever again. Because she was a horrible she was a horrible therapist. She talked down to me. She's like, oh, people in your situation, they don't just become bulimic. That's not how it works. And I'm like, bitch, yeah, I know this. I gave you an explanation on to why. It was a coping skill. And she's like, okay, yeah, okay, let's meditate. Fuck you, man. Kind of went on a little bit of a ramble, but yeah. Hope you enjoyed watching. If you're in an emergency, I have emergency links down below. If you need to talk to me, my DMs are always open. So, catch you in the next one. Ahui ho, malamo puno.